Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Some neighbors are annoying, some are nosy. And then there's this lady, the queen of petty drama, who made it her full-time job to harass the quiet family next door. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with a turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. 30 years of false police reports, this neighbor finally got what she deserved. This story's about my parents' long-standing battle with a very strange and obnoxious neighbor. They lived next to her for over 30 years, and from the beginning it was clear that she was one of those neighbors who loved to cause trouble and escalate any minor issue into a full-blown conflict. It started with small things, like my mom simply watering her plants in the garden, and this woman would stand at the fence, peeking over, staring at her. My mom, being the peaceful person she is, just kept watering her plants like she didn't notice. That's when the first real escalation happened. The neighbor called the cops, claiming we were too loud in our own home. We were laughing at a family dinner, hardly a cause for concern, but that was just the beginning. There was one incident when my 12-year-old brother was home alone. He wasn't having a party or anything, just hanging out in the house. But the neighbor decided that he was hosting a wild teenagers party, and she called the cops, claiming there were underage drinkers at our house. That call, just like all the others, was completely false, but that didn't stop her. After a year of her calling the cops on us for the most ridiculous reasons, like laughing too loud or being too noisy, my parents decided it was time to push back. But instead of getting into arguments, they simply kept living their lives. They didn't engage with her anymore and just let her make those calls. My dad especially was pretty good at staying calm and not letting her get under his skin. Then the situation took a turn. I was in college at the time, and I'd parked my car in front of my parents' house just a bit in front of her driveway. Of course, she thought she owned the entire street and assumed nobody could park in front of her house, so she started calling the cops on me. Every time she did, the cops would show up, ask if that was my car, and I would confirm. Then they would shrug, note that it was a false call, and leave. This went on for years, and the funniest part was she kept doing it. Each time it was the same routine. The cops would show up, I'd answer their questions, and they'd leave with no further action. Eventually, the police started to roll their eyes whenever they came out to our place, and they realized how ridiculous her calls were. My parents never had to say much. It was clear who was wasting everyone's time. Over the years, my mom and dad simply continued their lives while this woman dug her own hole deeper. She kept calling the cops on us, making false reports, and harassing us about these smallest things. In the end, the neighbor was finally charged for false reporting, something like 47 times in 1 year. They looked back through the records and saw that she had made calls like this for over 15 years. They realized she was a habitual liar, someone who had made a career out of making false reports just to cause trouble for others. Eventually, my parents decided it was time to move, which was a relief for all of us. They were able to get away from the constant harassment and have normal neighbors who didn't waste the authorities' time. The moral of the story is simple. When you deal with a Karen neighbor, don't waste your energy fighting them. Let them hang themselves with their own actions. You don't need to get involved, and eventually they'll trip themselves up with their constant nonsense. It's almost as if the universe has a way of balancing things out. She eventually got the consequences she deserved. But for my parents, the real win was just being able to leave the mess behind and find peace with new neighbors. Most people, myself included, let's be real, would have cracked by year 2, maybe even month 2 of having a neighbor that obsessive, that toxic, and that committed to calling the cops over laughter? Literal family dinner laughter? That's unhinged villain origin story behavior right there. And our second story. And our next story. Met my neighbor when she took my friend's cash off my driveway and told me I was rude. The other day, my friends and I planned a fun night out, dinner and a movie. Nothing fancy, just a good old-fashioned get-together. My friends carpooled to my place since I recently moved into a new home in a really nice neighborhood, and I drove us all from there. Things were going smoothly until we got to the theater. While getting her ticket, one of my friends reached into her pocket for cash and realized it was gone. She looked everywhere, her pockets, her purse, the car, nothing. Understandably frustrated, she brushed it off for the moment, but at dinner afterward, she asked if I'd mind checking my security cameras when I got home, just in case she dropped the cash in my driveway when getting out of the car. Later that evening, I reviewed the footage. I couldn't see her physically drop the money, but about 5 minutes after we'd left, a white car pulled up in front of my house. A woman hopped out of the passenger side, walked directly into my driveway, bent down, picked something up, and casually got back in the car. They drove off immediately. It wasn't a quick, "Oh, did someone drop this?" moment. She didn't knock, didn't leave a note, just scooped it up and left like it was her lucky day. Annoyed, I decided to post in my neighborhood POA Facebook group. I kept it civil and left out any photos, hoping someone can help. My friend was visiting today and dropped some cash in my driveway. I have a video of a lady in a white car get out and come into my driveway and pick it up. I have pictures of the person and car. If anyone has any information, please let me know. This was a lot of money to her. Thank you. I figured someone might recognize her. I didn't name names, didn't post any identifying messages. I was just trying to give the person a chance to do the right thing. Later that evening, someone replied, "I'll come by tomorrow." No apology, no clarification, just that. The next afternoon, there's a knock at my door. I answer it to find a woman, late 50s or 60s, clearly irritated. She jumps straight into a lecture telling me my Facebook post was very rude and how I was trying to threaten her by saying I had her photo. She goes, "What were you going to do, call the police over a little cash?" I replied calmly, "Well, you walked onto my property and picked up something that didn't belong to you. You're lucky I didn't post your picture, and I was hoping you'd just return it." She then doubled down, claiming the money was barely on my property and that she was waiting to see if anyone reported it. So she admits she knew it wasn't hers and just decided to keep it unless someone made a fuss. I pointed out that by her logic, if she left something valuable in her driveway, it would be fair game for someone else to come and take it unless she reported it. She didn't like that analogy and tried to spin the conversation back to how I embarrassed her. At that point, I told her we were done talking. She hadn't come by to apologize or return anything, just to defend her right to take something from someone else's property and be offended that I dared to call attention to it. As she walked away, still muttering, I found myself shaking my head. It gets better, though. I found out later she lives right next door. So that's how I met my neighbor. Not with cookies or a wave, but with her stealing money from my driveway and then scolding me for mentioning it. Welcome to the neighborhood, I guess. So she's a thief and trying to justify her theft on your property. Karen alert. It sucks that she's living next door to you, but you now know that the cameras were a great investment. If I were you, just discreetly ask your other neighbors about the thieving neighbor Karen. And our last story. City Karen learns country property laws the hard way. I live in a quiet neighborhood where my grandfather and I share a piece of land which has been in our family for generations. My grandfather, 83 years old, is an old-school farmer who takes no nonsense from anyone. We always had a peaceful relationship with our neighbors, but recently that peace was interrupted by a new entitled mother who moved in behind us. Let's call her EM, entitled mother. EM, in her mid-20s, and her boyfriend Frank moved into the house behind us, which had been vacant for a while. From the beginning, there were odd interactions. EM was the type to believe she could do whatever she wanted, and she didn't seem to respect the property lines that clearly divided her land from ours. It started when I was in the woods behind our property, cutting up some fallen trees that my grandfather had removed months earlier. As I was working near the stone wall that separated our land from hers, I heard the sound of a door slamming. I looked up to see EM storming out of her house in a bathrobe, glaring at me. She immediately started shouting, "What are you doing here? You can't be here," she yelled, her face twisted with anger. Confused, I just stared at her. Why not? "Because you're trespassing, dummy! You think you can just hang out in the woods behind my house with my kids inside? Get the F out of here before I call the cops," she ranted. At this point, I figured she was just confused. My family's owned this land for years, and I've been doing work on it for as long as I can remember. I tried to calmly explain, "Ma'am, I'm sorry if I startled you, but my family owns this part of the woods. My grandfather and I were back here a few months ago when that tree fell down. We're just clearing a path now." But she wasn't having it. don't be ridiculous. Those were laborers my boyfriend's dad hired. You don't own the land. My boyfriend's dad owns all this, she shouted, waving her hands at the property. Now, I was taken aback. I knew the property lines well, and I knew her claims were nonsense. Look, ma'am, the land belongs to my family. The woods are part of our property, and I'm simply clearing them. You're mistaken, and I'm not going anywhere. At this point, she was already calling 911, claiming there was a shady individual on her property who refused to leave. I decided to call the police non-emergency line myself, explaining that this was just a misunderstanding and I was on my own property, unarmed and waiting for my grandfather to arrive. While I was waiting, I heard my grandfather's truck pull up and he made his way toward me. I greeted him, and as he crossed the stone wall into the yard, EM started shouting at him to stay back. My grandfather, who's not known for mincing words, growled at her, "Keep your mouth shut, you dumb broad." "Now, who the hell do you think you are, and why are you yelling at my granddaughter?" he demanded. EM, completely unfazed, shouted back, "My boyfriend's dad owns all this, and both of you are going to get arrested for trespassing." My grandfather, ever the one to stay calm in the face of nonsense, chuckled and said, "Oh, did he tell you that? Well, you're in for quite the shock, and your boyfriend's dad's in for quite the talk." The back and forth continued until 2 cop cars pulled up and 3 officers walked toward us. As soon as EM saw them, she launched into her usual tirade about how we had no right to be on the property, claiming we were looking into her kid's house. One of the officers turned to my grandfather and asked, "Sir, do you own the property behind this wall?" "Yes, I do," my grandfather replied proudly, pulling out his ID to prove his address. The officer glanced at it, then looked up. "Sir, this address is down the street. Are you saying that the property lines extend into these woods?" I jumped in and showed the officer the Google Maps image of the property boundaries, which clearly showed the land extending all the way up to the stone wall. The second officer, after confirming, said, "Yeah, it's pretty clear that this is his land." Then they turned to EM, who was still yelling about how he had no right to be there. As the officer started questioning her, my grandfather spoke up, explaining that he had given the previous neighbor permission to dump their leaves behind the wall and that he had never seen EM before. "She's crazy, and I don't know where she got these ideas," he said, laughing. The officers nodded and asked if it was okay for them to stay around while they waited for Frank, EM's boyfriend's father, to arrive. My father agreed, and we waited for about 10 minutes before Frank pulled in. Frank seemed confused as he approached us. "What's going on? Someone hiding out in the woods? You okay?" After some back and forth, Frank realized the misunderstanding. Apparently, EM thought we were chasing someone out of the woods, but it turned out she had just made everything up. Frank explained that EM's behavior was tied to her not getting along with the family, and she was under stress, but he was tired of it. He agreed to talk to her about her actions. Once Frank spoke to her, the situation cooled down. The officer suggested we file a report just to document everything, which we did. As it turned out, Frank later told us that EM was evicted for a number of issues, including the drama with the land. Apparently, she was refusing to work and was constantly asking for money from Frank. While I do feel sorry for her in some ways, I have no sympathy for the way she handled things. She was entitled, rude, and refused to respect property lines. In the end, karma got her, and she had to face the consequences of her actions. It's amazing how quickly the situation escalated just because she couldn't respect boundaries, literally and figuratively. What really got me was the mix of ignorance and entitlement. Like, not only did she not know the property lines, but she doubled down and dragged law enforcement into it like she was dead sure she was in the right. That level of confidence in your own wrongness is actually impressive in a scary kind of way. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.